This particular group of sea ducks, or surf scoter, will fly from tidal area to tidal area on oyster bars to feed, depending on the stage of tide. Right now, the tide appears to be ebbing, which means the scoter will fly from productive bed to another productive bed, depending on the level of the tide. I've observed this type of waterfowl for a few years now, and usually one or two will decide to move the entire flock to another productive zone, and the rest of them, most likely younger, will follow. The overall health of the flock depends on their food source, and in this scenario, the food source happens to be mussels. If the weather changes drastically and heats up to the point where there's no more oxygen in the water, all of these oyster beds might die off. I guess that would be the biggest concern for all the waterfowl in the region and in this particular latitude, because the same types of birds exist on the eastern seaboard as well. I've also observed eagles like the one you just heard preying on duck. They're fairly easy targets out here as they sit out in the open areas. They're totally exposed. Which means they are very susceptible to larger raptors that prey on them. As I've walked through some of the neighboring coastal areas, I haven't found very many carcasses that would lead me to believe that the scoter or sea duck is a big source of prey for the bald eagle. I don't think they particularly like the taste of them, and I do believe that it's more of a survival food for the eagle when they have to. They will eat sea ducks. It truly is amazing to see a species work together in unison for the greater good. And the greater good would be to continue the species. This is something I've observed year after year in the natural environment. And it's also something that humankind doesn't seem to be able to grasp. Here's a small flock of Barrow's goldeneye approaching the larger flock of surf scoter. Now, Barrow's goldeneye is a sea duck, but for hunting purposes, it's considered a regular duck for your bag limit. And this is a pretty good example why that would be. You notice there's probably about 300 surf scoter over to the right here. And this left flock, smaller group of goldeneye, counts into the probably about 7 to 8 of them. So it makes sense why the bag limits would be smaller for one and not the other. For sea duck, we have a bag limit of 10, which a daily bag limit of 10 seems like an awful lot when you add in the duck bag limit. I couldn't imagine going out every single day and taking that many animals. And the inherent problem with modern day technology with semi-automatic shotguns with high velocity shot, it seems like the bag limits are on the liberal side. And to be quite honest with you, unless you're living subsistence, like I try to do very hard, I don't believe the masses really need that many animals. Most people come to these remote locations and hire a guide and a captain for duck hunting and have high expectations of specific species, which is okay to shoot a few of, I believe, because there are ample numbers. But when you start talking about repeated blasting of bag limits for each individual hunter, I think it's a recipe for diminishing the entire system of waterfowl. Maybe we should start eating crow. There seems to be plenty of those flying around. There's a flock of about 100 of those right there, or more. And the thing about the raven, these are actually raven, is that they will perch upon the dried oyster beds and feed, whereas the sea duck remains in the water. The group of Barrow's goldeneye has kept some space in between the larger flock of surf scoter. And they seem to be kind of working behind them. Oh, here comes a 3 mallard. what I would like to see with daily bag limits with waterfowl for specific species is that you have a daily limit of about 3. With harlequin specifically, where there just aren't very many of them anymore, maybe lower the bag limit to, 1 or 2 a season. And if you end up shooting 1 or 2 on a single day, then you're maybe done hunting for the year, especially if you're on a guided trip. There's the tendency of shuffling game around from hunter to hunter to make it look acceptable for the bag limits, and that's really not right either. And the other thing that this really does for the guiding community is it makes those ducks like harlequin that much more valuable. So in theory, it's setting a higher price for that species of duck for the hunting experience. Unless you're eating these things for subsistence purposes, I really don't believe people need to be killing so many of them. And it should be based on income, period. When the tide comes up, these shells open up, and this was just laying there. But there's barnacles on these. And what happens to shellfish like this, when the temperature rises or there's an algae boom, different invasives take over and they end up overgrowing, and they end up killing the shell and the contents inside of it. I've seen it on the Great Lakes, and to a lesser extent here. I realize barnacles are naturally occurring, but when the temperatures change, certain species thrive and others are basically killed off from the other species. It's very apparent with human behavior that we procreate extensively, produce more of ourselves, and therefore remove things from our natural environment in order to survive. Humans have adapted to their environments to the point where we've created our own environments, even in our own workplace, which to me never really seemed natural, to sit inside an office all day and have that sort of a work environment. But that's kind of the norm nowadays, and people have become complacent with the thought, and it's a direct result of overpopulation.